million point something per day,
A day.
as opposed to the paid workers who normally do that work, which is some thousands of dollars a day.
Well, who's paying for that? That's why when people say, well, who's going to pay for all this climate change stuff? It's like, we are, no matter what you say, we are. Anyway, so why don't I get started, since it is about 5:30. In this agenda, I try to keep you awake. I'm going to be talking about ocean changes from global warming, and that'll be about a half an hour. Then I wanted to talk about some actions. First thing is EPA's proposed endangerment provisions. If you're not familiar with that, we can talk more about them. Also, we talked about connecting with other like-minded groups to try to increase our numbers, or at least increase the number of people we can work with. And then, it sounds like we already know the last bit, but talking with Brookings mayor.
City manager.
City manager, there we go, okay. And then the next meeting. So with that, let me see if I can change here to the other presentation. And we'll start with that. Okay, so you're familiar with this, that's me. So from your perspective, what is the most critical impact on the oceans from global warming? What would you say is the key one?
The loss of fish.
Loss of fish, for a variety of reasons. There's a seat right here for you. It's nice and warm. I was sitting in it for a while. Welcome, Marine. So, what else? What are you aware of? What's that?
Coral reefs.
Absolutely. I think that's for me as a marine biologist and a coral reef biologist, it hurts a lot. What other things have you heard of? What do you think of?
Acidification.
Acidification's got a lot of impacts, yeah. So, well, we'll go through some of those, talk a little about the causes and all. So I was going to first talk about ocean heating and what the consequences of that is, and some of the effects, the extent of what it is, and also ocean acidification, why it's there, some of the chemistry, and what some of the effects are. So you probably have seen this before. The global surface temperature has gone up and up, and 2023 was the hottest year on record until 2024, at which time that was the hottest. And we'll see what 2025, as I've been told, estimates probably number 3. Certainly it's going to be in the top 10. In fact, the top 10 hottest years have been the last 10 years. It's a heck of a record to keep going. But Earth is a water planet. 71% of the surface is covered by water. So it's actually a pretty good thing, as we'll see in a minute. Now, if you look at where all this global heat has been trapped, the atmosphere, you can barely see it down there, but it is there. If you look at the land, because of the heating of the land, it's got a little bit more than in the atmosphere. You look at the ice, which is largely the heat that's been trapped by melting the ice, it's a bit more. But then you get into the oceans. Now, 2,000 meters is very deep ocean. I mean, it goes a lot farther than that, but it's not very well studied. Between 2,000 meters and 700 meters, and 700 meters is about the twilight zone. It's about where sunlight doesn't get beyond. And so there's a fair amount that's been trapped there, but from there to the surface, a massive amount. Now, what's even concerning more is that half of the increase has happened within the last 10 years. So it's heating up, and it's heating up rapidly. Now, it's interesting, the suggestion is 93% of this extra heat has gone into the ocean, which somebody had made an estimate of that. The average temperature of the Earth is roughly 59 degrees. If there hadn't been an ocean there, we would be, on average, 63 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. In other words, the average temperature would be 122 Fahrenheit. So very fortunate that as a water planet, it's kept it just to the limited amount that we've had so far. Now here's the ocean temperatures, and this is from 1950 all the way up to now. And you focus on the right side of it, you see that there were these peaks that corresponded to the El Nino. El Nino is when you have the warming trends, and that's when water temperatures are higher. You can see La Ninas are lower, but still the trend, even current La Ninas are hotter than past El Ninos. Now, if you look at ocean heat content, how much energy is in there, And this is the average for the decade between 2013 and 2023. Now, in 2023, you see some peaks. 2024 exceeded that. I mean, it's pretty well above the average. This last one, September 26, was interesting because it's on September 26 that the Hurricane Helene was forming. And it was on its way up to Florida. And it's kind of interesting because it's a massive hurricane, really big, but really amazing that on September 26 at 6 in the morning, it was a Category 1. The next day, by noon, it was a Category 4. Now, the problem with that is people don't have enough time to make preparations, to evacuate, to do things that you would normally do, because they go, Category 1, we've been through that a lot. You got a day, and all of a sudden, it's much worse than that. So that's a real big issue. And then it landed on shore, went on up, and there were areas with more than 10 inches of rain in places. Picked out Asheville because that was an area, it was Yahoo News, I believe it was, that ranked the towns or counties in the U.S. By the way, Curry County was ranked the lowest, the county that was least likely to be affected by climate change in the Pacific Northwest. Asheville was noted as being a city that was among the lowest chance of being affected. Asheville almost disappeared because there was such massive flooding. It was the flash floods and everything, very, very devastating, and they're still trying to fix out that. So from the extra heat, a variety of things are happening. We have physical changes, we'll look over on now. That means increasing evaporation. The more heat there is, the more water is going to be evaporated out. More moisture in the air and more energy in the air. We're going to see that there's more intense, more rapidly intensifying storms, like Helene. It's a very big deal if you can't prepare for things. Slower moving, longer lasting storms. As the winds are changing, they don't move the storms along as fast, so they got a lot of water, they rain and rain and rain, then you get more and more flooding, which just makes sense. Okay, so at the same time Helene was forming in the Atlantic, or in the Caribbean, the Hurricane John was hitting Mexico's west coast. There's Acapulco there. It was interesting because a year earlier, an even larger hurricane hit Acapulco and devastated it. In fact, the winds were a Category 5. They intensified by 115 miles per hour in one day. You go from a Category 1 to a Category 5. If you saw pictures of Acapulco, it was just destroyed. Again, you don't have time to do anything. You have sea level rise. You've heard about that. It comes from melting glaciers or big sea or land masses, ice masses on land, like Greenland or Antarctica. You have also the other half of that, as water is warmer, it expands. So the amount of sea level rise we've seen so far is about 50-50 in round numbers. Now, most of the projections you see are in the next decades or at the end of the century, with certain exceptions. If things didn't quite get it right in how fast the glaciers on Antarctica are melting, or how the Greenland ice sheets are stable and how they're melting, it could accelerate a lot faster than that. It is interesting here that we don't really have that much to worry about, because the suggestions, the projections are that we wouldn't see much in the next few decades. We'll probably not be around in the next few decades to really find out. NOAA had prepared this interesting, sea level rise viewer, and thought, all right, this is what it says for an average mean higher height water, the normal high tide, and it doesn't show with 2.5 feet a whole lot. Maybe some of the beaches are shorter. Well, that's straightforward. If you go up to 5 feet, you might see up the Chetco a little bit. If you go up to 10 feet, well, that's going to be a long, long time from now. And we don't see that big of a change. Go to some place a little bit farther north. Coos Bay has a lot more estuaries and more areas there. Back at what it is right now, you can see that, well, mainly in those green areas, there's going to be wetter. This up here is in the middle of the island, so that stays what it was. But we got here at 5 feet, You can see more areas that are consistently wet, and there's the wetlands around Coos Bay itself. At 10 feet, well, we lost the airport, lost basically all of the north jetty, and so that's but that's likely to take a long time. But I don't know that you want to be investing in the next decades in the areas up there. Now, is there any place that you would be interested in seeing that sort of projection? Say that because here's a really interesting thing that NOAA has, at least right now, until climate change is wiped off the government servers. But where would you be interested in what sort of sea level changes there would? What city?
Harrison, Idaho.
I probably can say without much concern that it's not going to show a lot with sea level rise. What about?
Olympia, Washington.
Okay.
Or Crescent City, which is a little bit more flat.
Okay, let's see. Crescent City, USA. All right, that's what we have right now at normal. How about 2 feet? Doesn't really show that it's going to be affecting that much. How about 5 feet? Well, there's some areas that are going to be affected. It might be, see if we can pull it down a little bit. Some areas, yeah. So that'll be more. So that'd be a bit of a concern. If we do it 7.5 feet, it's going to get a lot more. If we were to go 10 feet, so yeah, there would be a lot of effect there. But because it's fairly high relative to that, but again, it does not take into consideration storm surge. So when you have a big storm, that's going to be 2 feet, 5 feet on top of, already the storm surge is going to be sitting on top of that. So right now, if you walk the beaches here, you can see that those heavy waves in a winter storm can go way up the beach. Add 5 feet to that, and you realize that that's going to affect the coastal properties pretty significantly. Any other cities?
Miami.
Oh, Miami's a good one. Oh, come on. Miami, Florida. Or we did just, I did that one already. That's at 10 feet. Well, let's just drop it back down to a mere 5 feet. And that's the airport. So, and again, with the hurricanes and what, a 15, 20 foot surge, you know, they already, and there's no Miami Beach there.
Did you say Olympia, Washington?
Yeah. I don't know how their waterways are affected by ocean, though.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
They're right on the Seattle, whatever
Olympia,
that
Washington.
Yeah, Puget Sound.
So this is, let's go back down to the current, and that's the areas we'd have. Let's see, move it down a bit. And let's jump up to 5 feet. Doesn't look like it's having that much of an effect. 10 feet, it's going to be moving it in a ways. There are some other low spots that would be affected. Here is the 5. So again, because of the steep terrain, it's nothing like the East Coast. So let me see if I can get back to the presentation. Let's see.
Oh, wait a minute, are they on the coast? Or maybe
Yeah,
it's Galveston.
Galveston's on the coast.
Galveston.
Galveston got destroyed by a hurricane back in the turn of the century, I think it was. Other century, possible.
Yeah, so here's Galveston. And let's look out a little ways.
Look at the song right here.
Yeah.
And let's see, how about a 3 foot change? Ooh, that's going to have some real problems. 5 foot change. But Galveston doesn't ever get hit by hurricanes, does it? Sorry, I know that. So yeah, you can see a lot of the coast down there is going to be really affected. So that's Texas. And Houston is up here somewhere. There's like Charles. Yeah, so you don't map that stuff. Or Idaho.
5 feet what you're showing now?
That's 5 feet.
And when would that happen?
What's that?
When's it projected to happen?
Well, it depends. Some people say it could happen within 2 to 3 decades if the Antarctic ice sheets start melting. Other projections, it's going to be the end of the century. So
So way
I was thinking about investing in dryland property, now that would be waterfront property soon, but not soon enough.
Probably for your grandkids, for that investment.
Will be a benefit to you. Always thinking about yourself, all right.
Okay, another thing that happens because of the extra heat is changes in ocean currents. Now, you may have heard about the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the AMOC. Now, the interesting thing about that, that's all part of what's the thermal haline circulation. I got schooled on this when I was doing an oceanography class a few years ago. It was really amazing because the early oceanographers went all around the world and sampled the water, and they were shocked. They were surprised that there's an amazing amount of uniformity in the different physical characteristics around all the oceans. And that's because of this thermal haline circulation. As you kind of see with this, water gets moved around and then goes around all the way around to the different oceans. And so it's a good thing because it helps distribute nutrients, heat, various other things like that. You don't have the stagnation. Now, if we look more closely at the Atlantic Ocean, that's the AMOC they hear about. And it's really interesting as the water, surface water goes along here, it's going to be fairly hot. It's also going to be evaporating. So it's going to lose a lot of the water, but it leaves the salts behind. The more salts, the more dense it is. It's nice and warm. It stays to the surface. As it goes up there, as it gets higher up, it loses that heat, but it still has the salinity in it, so it gets more and more dense. By the time it gets up to the areas up in Greenland, it then is denser than the surrounding water, and it sinks down. That sinks down, goes way down, goes all the way to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, down to the bottom of that area. And as you saw on the previous slide, it takes a circle all around the world. Now, that's good if things work right. However, some of the studies, and I'll show you a little bit of a picture in a second, that it's losing its stability. And if it loses its stability, either how fast it goes or if it stops entirely, there's some significant problems with that. Now, here's a picture that depicts the current temperature increases on the Earth. And that little blue spot is the oddity, because why in the world is it not hot like the rest of it? The suggestion is that the Greenland ice sheets are melting and letting cold water come into there. That cold water is going to be fresh water. It's going to be sitting on the top. This is used to having the water up there being dense and cold and sinking down. Well, this is mixing with that, or it's making a layer. So that slows things down. Now, it's kind of interesting when you look at this. That water, that heat is coming over here and keeping a lot of Europe nice and warm relative to what it would be. That Barcelona and Chicago are on the same latitude. So if you've been a winter in Chicago, it ain't like Barcelona. Trust me, been there. Calgary is even worse. And so it can tell that if this slowed down, if this energy, this engine pushing warmth up to Europe were to slow down, Europe would get much, much colder. Of course, that heat's got to be somewhere. It's going to stay down here, so other parts are going to get much hotter. And that just throws a whole balance off. So who's to say what's going to happen after that? So those are overall changes to the currents. What about locally? Yeah.
Was that part of it, when we talked about this before, when the waters in Florida got like 100 and some degrees?
Yeah.
Is that part of that whole thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a combination of the waters going across the Atlantic through the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico up by Florida. There's a lot of time be on the surface and heat up. So, yeah, it's all part of the overall systems. So localized changes in wind, that's of interest here. And the concern is it could upset the balance of upwelling. So again, we've got systems that are very well tuned and really adjusted to how things are. It's kind of a nice baseline. But if we start tweaking things, or if things start changing, things don't work as well. How many of you are familiar with upwelling? Have a good sense of it? Okay. Yeah, so it's really nice because when the summer winds blow down the coast, it means it's pushing the water along. But the interesting thing in the northern hemisphere, water will be pushed off to the side. Just sort of think of a crowd of people as you're pushing and somebody going to be pushed off to the side. And that's because of the Coriolis effect. It can't go to the left because there's the coast there. So as it goes off its warmer surface waters have to be replaced, so you get deeper, colder, nutrient-rich water coming up. Now that's been out there for a long time. It's not real high in oxygen, but it has lots of nutrients because they've all sort of rained down. That's great because the phytoplankton use that. The phytoplankton get eaten by the zooplankton get eaten by the fish and such, so that we have really, really good fisheries. Now, the concern is that here is how things are sort of standard. The low pressure cells, it's warm here, it's cooler off there. We have the wind stress going here under right balance. If the heating happens inland, it causes more winds. The more winds, you have the enhanced greenhouse gases. We have the wind stress increases, so we have the offshore pressure being that much higher. It'll be increasing the upwelling, which isn't necessarily a good thing because it's finely balanced. With that, it can lead to increased algal growth, which may or may not be good. If it's not in balance, we can have algal blooms. Algal blooms can lead to eutrophication, which basically is just over-fertilization. They get in massive numbers, the algae in massive amounts, and that can cause some problems. It can result in low oxygen or no oxygen zones, which we'll talk about in a second, of dead zones. And one of the reasons this became a big deal very recently is with the offshore winds. The suggestion was that, you put these turbines out there and they're harvesting that energy. That means there'll be less wind energy to move the water, less upwelling. Jack Barth actually last January gave a talk here on upwelling and it's a very good job. He's an oceanographer from OSU who's been studying this for 20, 30 years. He gave a very animated talk, really interesting, and he said that from what he was able to tell, the effect was going to be balancing out, maybe. Certainly it's on the same order of magnitude or greater, in that there would be more upwelling due to the increased winds than would be lost from the harvesting of the winds by the turbines. But it was in, close sort of thing. With the local data, and this is very confusing, I'll admit, but here they said just for a measure, looking at the days that were above 90 degrees in Portland. So over time, going from 1980 up to 2024, you see that there is that trend, and there are more days with 90 degrees, above 90 degrees than there were decades ago. That's one piece of data. And that then, with the extra heating, leading to more stronger winds, we do see that the wind stress is greater. That means that there is more upwelling. So based on his data from the last 20, 30 years, there is, in fact, more of the upwelling going on, which is leading and explains some of the issues that we've got with eutrophication. Now, there are a lot of dead zones around the world for a variety of reasons, largely because human activities jumping nutrients into the water, causing the dead zones. Locally, in 2002, Oregon first saw our dead zones. Now, it's a regular event. The worst was 2006. 2017, 2018 was the most recent, and they were pretty substantial. So these are, they call them the dead zones. They don't really like the number but in fact,
some can swim away. Some try to crawl away. Others might propulse away. Many are just too slow or stuck.
Dead zones of low oxygen water kill crabs, fishes, and other marine life. And the recent annual occurrence of dead zones in the nearshore points to dramatic changes in our ocean environment.
So it's interesting because they have been following this now, and as they said, if you can run away, then that's great. If you're stuck there, like clams and things that can't, or crabs that can't go fast enough, then they're going to die. It's just going to have some significant effects on harvesting of the animals. Now, in addition to all this, we have a reduction in sea ice. As the sea gets warmer, You can see for 500 up to 2,000, the amount of ice in the Arctic based on some of the cores they've done, and so it's a pretty good record back there until now. If the extent of ice was, say, 10 million square kilometers, and now it's about half, that's a hell of a loss of sea ice. Now think about it. If you have ice that's there, the sun shines and it reflects most of that energy back out. If that warms things up, the ice melts, now there's more open water. More open water, that absorbs it, and that reflects or it re-emits the kind of wavelengths that will be captured. So it's a reinforcing feedback loop, only it's a positive feed loop. The more ice gets lost, the warmer the water is, causing the more ice to get lost, causing more warming. So that's one of those feedback loops that you might have heard about, maybe a tipping point. And you can see that we've lost an awful lot of ice already. In addition, we can see localized heat waves. And you might have heard from when we had, it was what, 2 years ago, the massive heat wave on Pacific Northwest, and you see some of the pictures of the intertidal animals that died. It was quite significant. A couple of months ago, the New York Times did this really interesting graphic representation, and it showed these areas that were experiencing a heat wave. Now that heat wave, let's say go back in 2000 is when they started it, beginning of 2000, said 4%, a little bit over 4% of the world's ocean surface was experiencing a heat wave. Now jumping forward about a decade, it then was up to about 4%. So not a lot until about 2016 when there's this massive spike. It's been referred to as the blob. It's off here, had a massive effect on the local fisheries. A lot of people were happy because there were fish that normally don't come up here. We're up here for fishing. But it also killed a lot of things, and it was affecting the amount of algae, algal blooms, and toxicity, things like that. Continue on. There we go. In February 2024, let's see if I can get back one. Yep. There, June 2022, it was down to about 20%. By February 2024, it was more like almost 40%. So going from 4% in a couple decades to 40% is a big, big deal. Not only do the warmer waters favor, cause other things, but they favor the toxic algae blooms, and they add into the formation of the dead zones. Got a bunch of things going on with this, clearly. Now, those are sort of around the physical changes, the heating. The chemical changes are not trivial. Now, warmer waters hold less oxygen. So if you're already kind of oxygen stressed and the water temperature will go up, you're going to be even more stressed for two reasons. There's going to be less oxygen in the water, and probably your metabolism will go up as well. So you're going to have even more stress from that. That adds to the hypoxic and the anoxic zones, the dead zones, sort of being a bit of redundant here. And then also chemical changes or acidification. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Now the biological changes related to the marine heat waves are significant. As we saw with the video, mobile animals will move away if they can. The stationary ones will be in trouble. Now the mobile animals may be moving to cooler waters if they can, or it may be that animals that are used to tropical waters will be moving into new areas that are now warm enough for them. Now that can disrupt breeding cycles, food webs, migrations, various things like that. So biological systems are going to get messed up. 40 to 60% of the fish are at risk because they're too warm for the spawning and embryonic stages. The youngs are when they're at most risk. And so if you can't get the young spawning, you can't get the spawning to happen, you can't get the young to survive, you're having no adult fish to continue on. Like I said, many take advantage of the warmer waters, move to new areas. There's Dorado, which is mahi-mahi, or you might have heard of the dolphin fish. They are not dolphins, they are fish. Mahi-mahi are good for fish tacos, among other things. Others will seek the cooler water, some go deeper. they'll head to northern waters, which is, if you're a fisherman here and your gear is set up for getting things that are used to being found here, you may have to move with the fish, which many fishermen will do anyway, but then that disrupts other things like family life and your harvesting, who you offload your fish to, and various things like that. One interesting aspect about that is that there will be new fish species that will be here, and that what we need to do to adapt to this is finding ways of cooking those fish and making people to like new types of fish, be interesting types. Not only is it the prey that we're looking for, it's the predators. That's a Humboldt squid. You can tell by the size of the diver, that's a pretty big squid. And they are voracious predators. So if they move into an area that the fishermen are going to be normally capturing those fish, but the squid are up there in big enough numbers, that may just decimate your fish. In addition, it seems like gelatinous animals are more common. Jellyfish are increasing, suggested to be significantly. There are some things like this pyrosomes or sea pickle, which are actually more related to us than they are to crabs or lobsters, which is interesting. But there's a whole change in the ecosystem, which would have real problems for us. So, other things or migration things could change. Temperatures give different signals. Either the adults will delay going up the streams, they could get caught in storms. The smolt won't leave the streams at the right times. They may leave early, and if they leave early and they're used to a certain type of fish or a certain amount of algae or other food out there and it's not there, that's not going to work if they're not fully developed. So there are significant impacts like that. On a somewhat different note, we have sea turtles whose sex is determined by the temperature their eggs are developing in. Northern end of the Great Barrier Reef, 99% of all young green sea turtles are female. And that's because the water's too hot to allow for the development of males. Plants and non-mobile animals die, as we've seen. That leads to can lead to coral bleaching. Now here's an interesting graphic from, I did it in the 10th of April, and it shows coral bleaching. Here is no stress gets to that. Notice this part of Australia. That actually has a reef that is every bit as fantastic as the Great Barrier Reef on the east side. But that has seen roughly 95% of its corals have experienced bleaching, and they're concerned about it. They'll be in deep trouble. You can see off the the west coast of South America, that's the Galapagos right there. So it's going to be stressing a lot of places. That was a single point. This is the suggestion between April and July this year. And you can see, again, that part of Australia, this part of Indonesia, all these areas are going to have a very, very high chance of extreme impacts. Now, the coral bleaching is of interest to me. I mean, I spent a bunch of time over there in the Virgin Islands, and that's where I got to love coral reefs. And here's an interesting animation, if it'll go. This is over 10 days, so starting early August. Actually, I'm going to get to go diving right about there at the end of, for my birthday next year. And yet, I'm concerned that the corals will not be there. And I've dived in places where the corals have been decimated, and it's not much fun for a coral biologist, I'll say that. So, bleached corals. Great Barrier Reef's lost half its corals for the last 30 years, increasing. They continue to have bleaching events. It's one thing to have it happen, then enough time to recover from it, but when you can't recover, it just repeated impacts. Okay, there we go. So in addition to the marine heat waves, we have increasing algal blooms, the red tides, we have the domatic acid. How many are familiar with domatic acid? So it's not good stuff. Domatic acid poisoning is a neurotoxin. Domatic is neurotoxin. Its symptoms are gastrointestinal disturbances, seizures, memory loss, or rarely death. So it's not good stuff to have. It is more common and more toxic in the warmer waters and waters that are more acidic. So we kind of have a double whammy coming with this. It has a big impact on commercial and recreational harvest of animals. In fact, 2 years ago in February, 2 years ago, the opening for harvesting Dungeness crab was pushed back to February, which means you've got a very short time window to do your harvesting. The razor clams are routinely closed. Any of the other filter feeding clams are closed. Mussels, if you harvest mussels, you have to pay attention to that. The Oregon Department of Agriculture tracks those, so you can, if you do go out, harvest, do foraging, be sure you check on those. Now, the domainic acid is produced by diatoms, that's a particular species, Pseudonychia. So the clams filter the diatoms, and the clams concentrate the toxin. Crabs eat the clams, and they concentrate the toxin. Now, a good thing is that the crabs it takes a long time for the toxin to go from their gut to their muscles, which means for here, we can still eat the crabs as long as we know it's not too high, it hasn't moved into their muscles. And the Department of Agriculture checks for that, so that's good. However, the crabs that the fishermen get the best prices for are over in Asia. Asians won't take them when the domainic acid is high because they cook them in a small amount of broth and in water, and they use that broth for making other sauces. And that basically just leaches out the domainic acid, so they're not going to take that. So when there's domainic acid outbreak, then the crabbers lose a lot of their market, and certainly the value of the market. So the crabs do that. Zooplankton filter the diatoms, and they concentrate the toxin. Fish, small fish, eat the zooplankton, concentrate the toxin. Bigger fish, mammals, birds. So you get they all concentrate, and they get domainic acid poisoning. This last winter, there were some scenes down in Southern California at the Wedge, a very, very famous place for surfers to go, body surfing, regular surfing. And it's hard to tell what that is, but that's a sea lion. And the sea lions were being very erratic. And I couldn't get the video, but you can see this massive surfers going in, not on the wave, just getting out of there because it was attacking people. So they were seeing lots of sea lions, other cetaceans. We've got the whales, various other animals that were being washed up and dying. It was the worst sort of rescue that the rescue people down there have had to do in decades. So, more locally, what we've had, you can see this is a temperature. You see that there's some not very, very warm water off the coast. So it's just throwing everything out of kilter. Okay. Global warming's forgotten cousin, because in the ocean, we can worry about this, which is the ocean acidification. Now, without going into a whole lot of chemistry, I'll touch about that in a second. But right now, we've put so much CO2 in the ocean, it is 30% more acidic than it was. Now, just as we wouldn't do well with eating a lot of acidic foods or bathing in acid, it's same sort of things happening. So we see the atmospheric CO2 goes in, it dissolves into the water, and it combines to make carbonic acid. The carbonic acid, the way the acids work, becomes an acid, they fall apart. And that is the bicarbonate ion, sodium bicarbonate. You're familiar with that. You put it in water and it'll do this, and that is a buffer. You have hydrogen ions. Now, the hydrogen ions are interesting because they want to go grab onto things. They grab onto the carbonate ions, and they go make bicarbonate. Okay, so they want to do that. They're scavengers. Problem is that cells, corals, various other things need to get calcium and these carbonate ions together to make calcium carbonate, make their shells. So if you put a lot of this in here, it scavenges it that way. There's less that goes in for the shells. Simple chemistry, actually. Now, here's an interesting curve, which is called the Keeling curve, because Dr. Keeling started in 1938 And up here at the top of the Mauna Loa, he started measuring the carbon dioxide concentrations in the air. Incredible long history of those measurements. In fact, that his son has taken over and has continued until the funding for this program, NOAA has been, but it wasn't so much cut as they sold the property. So they're going to stop this. Stopping from 58 to 2004, that an incredibly long history of that information is going to be sad to leave. This was in the ocean, and the green is the carbon dioxide in the ocean. Makes sense. It's paralleling what's in the atmosphere. That is the acidification. It's the pH of the water. So you can see the pH is dropping. Now the interesting thing is pH is kind of weird. It's a logarithm. And so a small change, that actually is a huge change in the amount of acid that's there. So typical pH is about 8.1. You can see it's getting down there. Well, locally, you can see these sort of hot spots. We're at 8.1, 7.9. And that's got a big consequence to anything that's trying to build a shell. Again, the larvae are the big problem, because if larvae can't build their shells, you can't grow. And that happened a few years ago in the oyster beds up north. And they discovered there were no larvae, and found out the seawater was more acidic than the larvae could tolerate. So here is a normal oyster larva. That's one with just a small amount of acid in the water. And so they had to do buffering of the water coming in so that you could have the larvae spawn. Now, it's not just oysters. You have crab larvae. This is an interesting critter. It's actually a marine floating snail. It lives out in the ocean. It's called a pteropod. Now that they've been able to see, they have ragged edges and other things that mean the shell is deteriorating. That's a big deal, because that's the favorite food, one of the main foods for salmon. And so salmon and others that are out there foraging, if they don't have food, then you don't have salmon developing. So adults expand more energy to form the shells, so it's not just the babies, but it means that if you're waiting for the crabs to get bigger, they use the energy to build the shells as opposed to build up their muscle. That's a problem. If they don't have as much energy, they can't swim as well. Salmon also lose their sense of smell when the water is more acidic. Well, you're not getting as much food, you can't smell things, you can't avoid predators, you can't find your home streams. Little bits, but over time, those little bits are significant. And don't even get me started on plastics. So, and that's a whole nother discussion. Anyway, so in summary, CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions are the cause. The result, hotter air and hotter oceans, more intense or persistent and deadly storms, local heat waves, changing ocean currents, ocean acidification. Solution, stop burning fossil fuels. Questions? Oh, I went on too
Good luck
long.
with that one.
Yeah,
Stop burning fossil fuels
I agree.
right now.
Even Kathleen's got no question. No. Yeah,
It's just very depressing.
I know. That's why I'm tempted not to give talks like this, because but it's real hard to give the upbeat, hey, climate change is doing great.
But to fishermen, they're the ones out there all the time. Are they not seeing this and raising alarms, or are they just pretending it's not happening?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I've mentioned to you, but it was a few years ago, I gave a distilled version of this to the Oregon South Coast Fishermen's Association. And I was told, don't say climate. So I got through the whole thing and never really said climate. But as I was talking about changes and the acidification and the dead zones, and I had a lot of people going, yep, Many of them had MAGA hats on. So it's like what they see, what they experience, what they're aware of, what they want to acknowledge, I can't say. I can't say with any validity, any certainty. But they're not stupid. and they are very well tuned to what's going on in the ocean. And that actually kind of leads to one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which is how do we get civil communications going to say, all right, without saying you're a liberal, you're a MAGA, you're a this, you're a that, you're a horrible person, you're a wonderful person, whatever. What are they actually seeing? What are they feeling? What do they understand? And you don't have to be a whatever to think that stop burning fossil fuels is a good idea when so many of the benefits from not burning fossil fuels are available. I mean, cleaner air, for one. There are so many that we could go on with. So any ideas about how we can make those conversations happen?
Well, I think sometimes when family members talk to each other and they're on, they listen to different news stations, let's say, they're not even sharing the same facts.
Right.
So that's really difficult. So how do you make factual information available so we're sharing the same facts so we can actually talk about the problem?
That's a really good question. I think what we first have to do is to get some mutual respect, mutual understanding that if we're attacking people because they are X, Y, Z, then nobody wants that. I don't want that. But having a conversation, well, what have you heard? That's why I think for Mike and others that are trying to develop stories so that people can see the stories, so that it's personalized. That's very important. I think I'm not a filmmaker. I don't know how to tell stories. I don't know how to present it in a way that pulls people in as they are being given facts that are based on verifiable sources that are credible. And do it in a way that doesn't immediately alienate people. Go, oh, you're just this, you're that. And I know plenty of people that will say exactly, I would never talk to a... So that's a big challenge right now.
It seems like if fisheries are suffering due to ocean warming, that it's got to translate into a smaller catch. And less money or profit. Bringing it home closer to home. So you would think that would bring it home closer to home. That would be one way to.
And that's why people talking to people like Father Bernie.
And that's why people...
What would people that you get your fish from? And that's kind of finding the fishermen that are approachable and just say, hey, let's go to lunch. In a different way, I was talking to Henry Johnson, who works at the mills now, and said, I'd love to sit with a couple of your foresters and see what's their take on harvesting wood to make that stuff, to make what we remetaled our house. Most of you who live in houses that are made of wood, which is a lot better than steel, a lot better than concrete, and it's sustainable. But they don't want to talk to somebody that's going to be liberals and say, oh, you're screwing it, you're doing this because there's a benefit to store that carbon dioxide over time. What's the balance? I think the first thing is to have the conversations.
Well, I think that if you approach a person who's living the life of a fisherman or a logger, and you approach them with questions, and you get them talking about what they're actually experiencing, then you're not preaching to them. You're not telling them what they're doing right or wrong.
Right.
And you might actually learn something. Now, how to then move from that kind of conversation to one that touches on the things you believe are causing the problems they're seeing, I don't know.
Right.
How that transition is made.
And that's where I think storyteller is important. So, Michael.
It's happened at least once in our lifetime. In 2009, Stephen Most from University of Oregon, I think, created River of Renewal, telling the story about how the Kara tribe finally figured out how to corral Buffett and that whole bunch and get them to agree to take down the dams, which is having an incredibly positive effect on that river. I read today about is it Ecuador has done some things that is bringing 3 rivers back right now? Because they created a pact that said the ecology gets a voice in law.
Yeah.
They have they're everything that we need to protect. If we are God's green earth, it's God's green earth we need to protect, and God's blue oceans. So if we can fix the climate, we can fix anything. But what can you fix when the public dialogue is today's public dialogue? And that's a whole different question. My theory is that's why the dialogue is so ugly today.
Absolutely.
To keep us from seeing these issues
Right.
that are confronting us day after day after day.
Right. One of the things that I'm listening to various podcasts and other sources was related to capitalism and the push of capitalism. We say, oh, a free market is nothing like a free market that we have right now. But it's when people that make their living with forestry, people that make their living as fishermen, what are they seeing? How is it affecting them? And what is it that we can marshal together to work together? Because if they are being affected and we can get changes that will help them, even if it's something as simple as new recipes to get people to appreciate the fishes that they're not used to getting, something other than salmon or tilapia. So.
And the way that Kurok tribe gentleman, Greg Tucker, I believe was his name, got this done was by creating the coalition between the sports fishermen, the farmers, and the tribal interests who had been pitted against each other forever.
Yeah.
He found a way to bring that coalition together because they all have a common interest in a world that functions.
And that's what's frustrating. It seems like we have way too many people that benefit by this division. So how can we get around that?
Well, I know that when solutions come down from on high, like Portland, not that I disparage Portland, I think it's a beautiful, well, I've never been there.
Has been.
It's a beautiful town. But when someone comes to a place where people have been living this for generations, and they come in and they say, but that's not gonna help, and you have to do it this way. A, they have no idea what they're talking about. B,
No.
they're not respecting the people's experience that are actually going through this. And that gives the entire movement, if you will, a bad name because they're not listening. They don't understand. So for us to, in my opinion, for us to at least make our own community, help our own community to start communicating, needs to be amongst ourselves. Bringing someone in from outside isn't going to help. We have to be humble.
Right.
And I think, and listen to the people who have been living this life. Fishermen Direct up in Gold Beach, one of the reasons I buy my fish from them is because they are very careful about how they keep their fisheries sustainable. And Bruce has told me stories about when, I think it was maybe the lingcod, where the fishery was crashing. And the fishermen in this area voluntarily stopped catching those fish for a couple of years to allow them to rebuild themselves. And that's the sort of success story that the people in Portland don't have any clue happened. And they come in here and they disparage us because, we're all greedy, rural yahoos, when in fact we're not.
No.
You know.
And that's why, well, Michael stepped out for a second, but it's like getting those stories out so that we can educate the people that come in from high and say, we've got the right answer. When I was living in St. Thomas, I was part of the community, I was part of the university, and I remember hearing the stories of a sewage treatment plant. Somebody from Ohio came down and said, this is what you need, you're gonna do this, it'll be great. They planned it, they did it all, they set it up, and within a year it was not working anymore. It was over capacity because they didn't get the right data. They didn't, it fell apart because nobody was managing it, nobody was doing the things. And that's because they came in and said, well, this works great in Ohio. This goes perfect in Iowa. But go to Caribbean and it's like, it doesn't get done today. The weather's gonna be the same tomorrow. We'll do it then. And so they didn't get the information to say what is the actual amount of sewage being created. And so, yeah, you can generate a lot of animosity, and it doesn't do anybody any good. Listening to what people have to say is critically important. I've mentioned, I think, to some of you, being part of the Coalition for Common Ground, and Michelle Carrillo has been in meetings a couple times, and she's leading that. And it's trying to get community members, tribal members, a variety of other groups, people represent other groups, to have these conversations. And hopefully that will evolve into something to get the stories there, to get the way of getting the stories out, having the communications like with Curry Cafe, getting different people in. So how do you get it out to the audience so they get that? So let me stop the conversation for a second right now, moving on to something else. And that's something I really like to do, is that you're probably aware that, or you've heard of, EPA's endangerment assessment. And the endangerment assessment, are any of you familiar with that? What that means, what that is?
I think so.
Basically, in, I want to say 2009, the EPA then did an endangerment assessment, and they looked at how carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas is endangering human health. And by having done the science and presented that, they were then able to have and I'm not sure if it's Congress, but they were able to say carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. The climate change is a specific human health impact. And so then that allowed there to be the regs and everything else to regulate greenhouse gases. The current administration, the current EPA, has redone that. Only the consensus by the scientists that study this stuff, that put it together, that know what's going on, say it's bad science, it's cherry-picking information. And so right now, there is what they call the reconsideration of 2009 endangerment finding and greenhouse gas vehicle standards, specifically to vehicle standards, but then that gets it broadly to everything else. Why does it matter? Because the elimination of that finding could remove underpinnings of all climate action. So if you think that the administration has done a good job at gutting renewable energy, this would make it even more substantial. So what can we do? We can submit comments to the EPA. As jaded as I am, I think we need to do that. The issue is...
What's the deadline?
I've got it here, but it's in a few weeks. So we can write email, call congressional representatives, tell everybody you can, send an email to the administrator of the EPA, make our voice and opinion heard. Now what I'm going to do is to go through, and I asked Karen to bring some pieces of paper, some tablets, and if you don't have any, and look at some of the tips for writing an effective public comment. And then what are the things we could do to help you, and it's all of it to help us submit our comments. They don't have to be scientifically rigorous or anything like that. It's you tell your story to the EPA and say, don't do this. This is why we'd like to have that happen. Now, when you do it, you need to reference the correct docket ID. Now, I've got PDFs of these, and I will send everybody a PDF of it so you don't have to take these notes. That makes it easier because unless you have very precise handwriting, if I took the notes, I wouldn't be able to read them as I'm writing it, much less later. So it's EPA HQ OIR 2025-0194 now 093. Got it? Okay. Don't think about that. But you do need that, and it's reconsideration, as it says there. Now, when you do it, be clear and specific and concise. Better for one well-crafted, well-supported comment than a whole bunch of form letters. Now, I've been part of various groups. They say, here, sign this thing, and you're part of this, and you will do all this wonderful stuff. And oh, by the way, give us money. It's like, okay. And what I've learned from the work with the Citizens Climate Lobby and talking to people that have worked in the offices of the representatives, they say if they get another form letter with 300 people signed it, with 5,000 signatures, it's like, okay, that's fine. If they get a letter that is written by somebody it has so much more importance. And even if you get one of these sort of form letters, but it allows you to change things, to put yourself, something into it, especially at the very beginning, so they go, oh, this is somebody new. That's very important. So,
Bill, I wanted to make sure,
yes.
was that the EPA 2009 endangerment finding? Did I have that right?
That is correct.
I could look it up under that.
Yes, and I'm going to send you the PDF so that you can, I didn't want to print it out because I don't like printing things, but
Get the email.
you'll have the email.
Have
So
all that info right there.
all of the stuff that you're seeing on slides will be there. So, and if you have questions, email me, call me, whatever. So when you do this, support your claims. Now, provide resources and data if possible and if appropriate. And I say that really importantly, if appropriate. If you're not a scientist, you're not somebody that has, well, I can cite this from 2008 by Dr. da-da-da-da-da. There are people that are doing that. But if it's your experience, that has incredible value. You're a constituent of these people. You are somebody that is going to vote, whether it's, if you send it to the EPA, if they don't do it, then maybe the people that put them in won't be there anymore. So do what works for you and explain your impact. Make it personal, stories of how you have been affected. How is it, whether it's you, your grandkids, your neighbors, your dogs, whatever. Those are all real important things because it's going to, by making it personal, now they're going to pay attention to it. Address specific provisions if you do that, if you're really in it, if appropriate to your comment. You go, well, in particular, the suggestion that da-da-da-da was having this effect, and it's like, I don't know. That's why do it for you. And be constructive. Don't simply complain. Oh, it's just hot and I can't do this. It's no fun. You shouldn't do that. It's like the more specific, the more positive you can be, the better it can be. And then when you do it, review it quick before you send it off because it's really, once you hit that send button, you go, oh man, I said we can't do this now. We can't do this not. We cannot do this. We can now do this. Oh wait, what did I say? So that sort of review is good. So make sure you said what you meant to say. Now here's a little comment template. I got this from some people. And you do an introduction and your ask. You say, don't do this, accept this refinement. And then tell your story. Again, we keep going back to stories. This is you personally. That has very significant impact. Incorporate facts that relate to you, relate to what your experience is. Give a conclusion. Doesn't have to be, any of this has to be very long, but September 22nd. And so you can do it online. It's best to do it online. I'm not sure if I've got the website in there, but certainly we'll provide that as well. And you can go on. What I'd recommend is do a word processor program and do what your thoughts are so you can copy and paste it into the online thing. Make it a lot simpler. You're going to start with an introduction. Now I would recommend this as a template. So my name is blank, and I'm from blank. I urge EPA not to rescind the endangerment finding. Now, I don't like presenting this because then they'll see a bunch of these, and so
Not verbatim.
Yeah.
In other words.
Yeah, but you do want to give your name. You do want to say where you're from, and what you really want to do is to convey your concern about this and why they need to to listen to that. So you want to tell your story, share how extreme weather, climate change impacting you, your community, that sort of stuff. So your future, your children's future, whatever there, personalize it. Affected by wildfire, yeah, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, extreme heat. Well, we don't quite get it over here, which is okay right now. Other extreme weather. What do they look like? So personalize it to the extent you can. And if you know anybody that lives somewhere else, you go, oh, my people that live over there, the relatives are always over here because it's 115 in the valley. So there are a variety of ways you can personalize it. Incorporate facts to the extent you can. We know that burning fossil fuels emits greenhouse gases, they trap heat, warns plant. We don't really have to tell the EPA, they know that. But make it that you are aware of that. That's why we need to keep this science. You have more intense, more common extreme weather to the extent that these could be something you would throw in, just so you know you're valid. 2024, 27 climate disasters, over $1 billion. Now there's a reference, climate.gov, and that actually triggers you to that specific source there. Today's children expected to face 3 times more extreme weather than our parents, their parents, grandparents. There's another one for Earth.org. And use a renewable resource, this resource, to learn more things. So there are 3, in the PDF you'll get, there will be 3 active links to more information. And then give a conclusion. Say what you want. I oppose this stuff. Don't do it. And make it simple. Short and sweet is best. So that's my pitch.